So you want to make a change at your organization. You know it's the right thing to do. You know what your team needs to do to make it happen. You also know it's not going to be popular because, let's face it, change isn't usually popular, especially in legacy organizations like the agencies and departments and organizations that we work for. So, what do you do? That's what we're going to talk about today. In this episode, we're going to unpack why people dig in their heels and how you can help them move, not by pushing harder, but by guiding smarter. This is the Parks and Restoration Podcast, the show that helps overworked and under-resourced parks and natural resource professionals become better leaders and change the landscapes of their communities, even when change is hard. I'm Chris Lee, Leadership Junkie and Conservation Department Director in Southeast Iowa, right on the banks of the Mississippi River.
And I'm Jeremy Yost. I'm in the Natural Areas Management Team here in Pottawatomie County. And we're in the beautiful Loess Hills of Iowa, where we burned every day last week.
Nice. 'Tis the season.
Exactly.
All right. Before we get into today's episode, I want to invite you to an exclusive meetup that we're having on November 21st with Jessica D'Angelo, best-selling author of the new book, Wild Advantage: Why Your Brain on Nature is Your Boldest Business Move. She has built an entire business around taking corporate leaders outdoors to unlock their biggest business ideas. She's put her framework into this book and it hit bestseller status in multiple categories on Amazon, which is pretty sweet if you ask me, because it's a business book about going outside. So as outdoor leaders, we're pretty thrilled to support a business strategy book anchored on taking groups and corporate leaders outdoors. So this live discussion with the author is only available to members of our Next Level Leadership community. And if you're not already a member, it's easy to do. Just sign up at parksandrestoration.com. You just go to the homepage there and there's a sign up link right on the page. You just give us your name and email. It's free. And in addition to an invite to this meetup, you'll get access to other gatherings and resources based on the leadership topics we cover in the show. So with that, let's get to today's episode.
Yeah. All right. So let's just say this up front. People are going to resist change. It's as predictable as turkeys gobbling in spring, us burning in the fall. But the real question is why?
Yeah, because if you understand why people resist, you can stop wasting energy fighting it and start channeling that energy into actually moving forward and getting some stuff done. Most of the resistance you'll run into comes from one of three pieces, and these are emotional, cognitive, or cultural. In their book Switch, Chip and Dan Heath describe it like this. So imagine someone riding an elephant down a path. The elephant is the emotion. The rider sitting on top of the elephant, well, that's the brains. And then the path is the culture. And none of those make people bad or stubborn. They just make them human. So we're going to go over these three types of resistance first. And then when we get through those, after we explain why people resist, then we'll talk about what you can do to bring them along and to overcome that resistance. And rather than it being a battle or a fight, that you can guide them along to bring the change on collectively. Stick with us and we'll get to that. But we're going to start with these three types of resistance first. All right. Let's start with emotional resistance. And what this comes down to is the fear of loss. So the emotion is the elephant in the switch analogy. And, you know, we really apparently like elephants on this show because I don't know how many times we've used an elephant analogy here, but this one isn't actually ours. This one comes right from that book called Switch. But people don't actually resist change. What they're resisting is loss. It's loss of control, loss of competence, loss of the way they've always done things. And this loss aversion, frankly, is hardwired in us. In the famous book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize winner, actually, described research that tested people's responses to gaining or losing $100. They found that the pain of losing the money was twice as pronounced as the joy of gaining it. In other words, we feel lost twice as much as we feel joy from the same metric.
Right. So when a new policy or process shows up, the brain doesn't immediately think, great, this sounds like an amazing opportunity. It's going to say, what might I lose? And it goes into defense mode to avoid that pain of loss. And the loss doesn't have to be monetary. It could be status, competency, or just like comfort with what's familiar. What is this process that I'm really familiar with? So the elephant looks down at that new path and thinks, no effing way. If you can't alleviate the elephant's concerns, good luck.
Yeah, I mean, try getting an elephant to do what an elephant doesn't want to do. So let's take this first example. Moving to an all-digital campground registration. I know folks in the world of county conservation here in Iowa have faced this, and I imagine that it has not been without its challenges. So think about it. For years, campers, if you're familiar with the world of camping, or if you run a campground or have been to a campground, especially here in Iowa, but really across the nation, the way it usually works is campers fill out an envelope, they tuck in a bunch of cash or a check. Sometimes it's coins they shove in there, and then they drop it in the self-pay box and go about their weekend. And then park rangers come around and they collect those envelopes, they count the cash, and they enter it into some sort of system. Maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's just a notebook. Whatever it is, they've got some sort of system, and it's all centered around opening these envelopes and counting the money that's inside those.
Exactly. And so this has been a system that's worked really, really well for a long time. But now comes along something like My County Parks or Reserve America or whatever software company it is that got the low bid in the RFP. With My County Parks specifically that we use in our county conservation system, you get a fancy QR code and visitors scan that code and then pay right there on their phones. I mean, as a millennial, that sounds awesome. If I don't have to carry cash, I don't have to carry coins, I don't have to write a check, I can just pay on my phone. That sounds amazing. It's faster, it's easier, fewer steps, and keeping with our modern times and changing demographics on paper, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. But emotionally, it feels like a threat. I mean, if you're a park ranger, or if you're a leader and you have a park ranger working for you, and that park ranger's done that paper process for 20 years, he or she owns that system. And if this is you, you know the flow of it. You can tell by the handwriting who's camping in what campsite. Like you can look at that envelope and be like, oh, yeah, it looks like the Johnsons are back in campsite number 7. And you've got that well-worn envelope opener hanging on the truck visor that you probably got from some conference 20 years ago. And, it's the perfect size, and it just slices those envelopes right open. And suddenly you're being told that system is gone. It's being replaced by a phone app and technology that you didn't ask for and certainly don't trust.
I mean, exactly. So, like in this case, what looks like leadership, what looks like innovation can feel to the staff like you're taking my control away. And that fear of losing that competency or that relevance or just losing face with the very people that they serve every weekend. That's what shows up as resistance. You'll hear things like the old way worked just fine or the campers won't like this. I mean, just a bunch of things like that.
Yeah, and honestly, those are valid concerns. They're not rebellion, it's just anxiety. And when you recognize that, you can start to guide people through it instead of pushing against them. Because here's the reality: when they say things like the old way worked fine or the campers won't like this, yeah, those things are all true, but that's the manifestation or the justification of the fears and the anxiety that they're harboring. Nobody's going to come right out and say, man, this scares the shit out of me. I don't really want to give up my competence of the old system. They're not even going to recognize that. And they're just going to feel this anxiety and be like, man, this isn't going to work. This thing's going to fall flat on its face. And it's going to manifest in those types of conversations that we've all seen when we try to bring change. And so the whole idea is to guide people along instead of pushing against them.
Exactly, and, like, you can end up, if we're just thinking about it from, like, that user's perspective, like, trying to make it easier for millennials that just wanna pay on their phone. Even here at Hitchcock, like, we charge $5 to get in as an entry fee, which, personally, I don't super agree with, but, it's the normal at a lot of national parks that you have to pay to get in, and, we're using that model here locally too. It just feels a little bit different to a lot of people because we're about as far away from a national park as you can get. The nearest national park is like 400 miles from Hitchcock. And so like many of our casual users, they don't realize that you have to pay until they're at the pay box. Like it's kind of amazing how many times I've seen people come to our pay box and then just have to turn around because they're not carrying $5 in their back pocket. And expect that's especially true of younger generations that in a recent poll over 30% of Gen Z said that paying with cash is cringe. I mean like that's got to be a generational thing cuz I'm not even sure what cringe means. I mean if I'm being honest. But in
Right.
that same poll, Gen Z also said that paying with cash, over 50% of Gen Z said that paying with cash is a last resort. Like literally they will choose to pay on their phone or with a credit card. And so really, when you're coming up with these innovations and you're thinking about it to, serve this other demographic, it's really important to not just think of it from the user's perspective, but to actually bring your people along So that brings us to our second kind of resistance. It's called cognitive resistance. This is like the rider on top of the elephant. This resistance will come when people just don't have a clear mental picture of what's happening, when the path forward is fuzzy or like the brain ends up hitting the brakes.
So let's use another example here. So let's say you've got a developed park and it's very much the mindset has been mow and manicure. Everything is mowed short and everything's trimmed real tight. And you want to shift that mindset more to a rewilding approach because you see the decline of pollinators. You see that the monarch was recently listed on the Endangered Species Act, and you know that this is good for pollinators. You're looking at the budget and you realize that, taking some of these areas that we're mowing and putting them into a pollinator garden is going to be cheaper in the long run because you're not mowing and spending the staff time to keep all that grass chopped down like a golf course. But your maintenance crew hears we're not going to mow certain areas anymore. And their first thought is, wait a minute, are people going to think we're lazy?
Yeah, exactly. Are they gonna like start to think that they're gonna lose hours? Or like they start to just automatically think, how do I explain this to the public when they complain about the tall grass? And if we stop mowing, aren't there gonna be weeds? We have to control those weeds. You're just making more work for me. Are we just gonna stop mowing? Or are we gonna do something about it? What about the snakes? In wild areas, there's snakes. What about the snakes?
Yeah.
There's just too much uncertainty. There's no clear what or why, so people will just start filling in the blanks, and they will usually fill them with the worst case scenario, like snakes.
Exactly. Or bats or bugs or whatever, ticks, who knows? And in the book Switch that we were talking about earlier, Chip and Dan Heath talk about this directing the writer. Logic needs clarity. Like Jeremy said, the resistance you're going to get is simply going to be the logical brain filling in the blanks. And so if you don't paint a clear destination, the logical part of the brain can't steer that elephant. And the emotional part, that elephant, is going to simply refuse to move or just dig in on that trail that has been going down and not shift its path whatsoever. It's not laziness, it's confusion. And so clarity is an absolute must. We'll talk about that here when we get to these solutions. But so let's jump into the third one here, the third and final one, and that's cultural resistance. This is that, well, that's not how we do it here, that we've all likely heard and maybe even uttered ourselves. And this is a huge one. It's cultural, it's ingrained. Even when you address emotion and clarify logic, the culture itself can still dig in its heels. Change is a challenge to the status quo. And frankly, the status quo is comfortable. We all like that place. We know it well. It's that well-worn path that the elephant just wants to continue on down, and the rider knows what is at the end of that trail. I want to use an example of something we did. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but we have a park. It's a roadside park here in Des Moines County. And back in the day, roadside parks were a thing when people would go on drives and they'd, pack food and they'd go and have picnics out on roadside parks. And nobody really does that anymore. And it was underutilized and we were up against budget cuts. And we're also facing this challenge that we're all facing with the decline of pollinators. And we were watching the decline of the monarch and how it was at the time being recommended for listing in the Endangered Species Act. And it's now since been listed. But we're like, okay, how can we balance the need to reduce costs with still meeting our mission of conservation and natural resource preservation and doing what we want to do for protecting the pollinators and that kind of stuff. And one of the conclusions that we came to was this park that was multiple acres of just mowed grass that saw very little visitation. We said, we're going to turn this whole thing into a pollinator patch. And so we worked with our local Pheasants Forever chapter to secure the seed and the chemical and the cost for doing the whole conversion, and started the process of turning this turf grass area over to a pollinator garden. Now, when you do that, it tends to look a little wild, I guess. And we had a lot of the people from the community come out and really accuse us of just, not maintaining this park anymore and just walking away from it. We had put up a sign saying what we were doing, but, oftentimes people don't read signs. And they just did not agree that this was the right use of it. And what this is getting to, this is cultural resistance. We're so ingrained with this idea that we have to mow and manicure, and parks should be mowed and look like a golf course. And if you're not going to do that, then you should one of the suggestions was sell it so we can build houses here. And so we caught some resistance that way. And the way we got past it was we addressed it head on. I think there's probably still some folks that weren't happy with us. But one of the solutions that we came up with was mowing a path kind of around the perimeter of it so people could still walk around it, and then kind of mowing the parking area so that what you saw from the road was not quite as unkempt looking. And one of the neighbors came out and said that they'd volunteer to mow that little bit for us, and they had been for the last couple of years. So it all worked out kind of in the end. But again, that's an example of cultural resistance, not so much with the team, but with the community at large.
Exactly, and, like, this idea of culture, like, it plays out in the ecosystem too. A healthy ecosystem, it literally exists to protect what's worked before. Like, in the prairie, the legumes fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and the grasses use that nitrogen to set deep root systems, storing carbon and other nutrients for the other species. And in an open prairie system that is maintained with fire and grazing, this yin and yang can persist for literally thousands of years. I mean, talk about a deep set culture, something that can just persist in its own for literally thousands of years. This system is hard to change naturally, and when you do try to introduce something new, the system's first response is basically an immune response that it's saying like that's not what we do here.
Yeah. And like that prairie analogy is perfect because you can come and you can burn that prairie down and it's just gonna come right back. And so what we did to, settle this part of the world was we came with the plow and we started rolling it over. And even with that, it took years to get that turned over so much where you actually beat the prairie back and eliminated the prairie because these roots are so deep. I remember that the essay that in Sand County Almanac that Aldo Leopold writes about Silphium and how it was, I think, in this pioneer graveyard, this pioneer cemetery, this one plant of Silphium just kept popping up and it just kept coming, and it took forever for it to finally fall victim to the mower. It was in this odd area, but he laments how this thing was so resilient for so long. And that's what we're talking about here is how culture really is a resilient thing. And frankly, that's not always a bad thing. We talk a lot about maintaining and cultivating a great culture at your organization. And that culture, the pride, the tradition, that's what makes your team who they are. I mean, that's what makes your team great. And that's what makes the ecosystem that you work in every single day. And that's the well-worn path that the elephant is comfortable following, like we said. But when pride becomes inertia, when you know it's the right thing to do to make a change, that cultural norm of this is how it's always been done. Like we collect cash and checks out of envelopes, and that's how people get into this park, or that's how they pay for campground, or we mow every inch of this park. When that becomes inertia, it really blocks evolution. It keeps you from moving forward.
Exactly. Like in those examples, like that the ranger, it's like it's going towards his identity, his boots on the ground, collecting envelopes, knowing all these campers by name. In the rewilding, like you said, it actually literally threatens the identity of the crew who takes pride in those perfect mow strips. It like threatens the literal cultural norm of a maintained means mowed like a golf course.
Yeah. And, society expects that and your team's going to expect that. So if we tie this back to ecology, so those ecosystems, they resist sudden shocks. So we talked about prairie, but now let's talk about forest. If you cut a forest without doing the upfront work of creating a management plan, controlling the invasive species, and selecting the right trees to take and keep, you're in for a mess. And I'm speaking from experience here. Jumped the gun on this at one of our main parks. And we did a stand thinning before we had the invasive species under control, and it's been years, and we're still fighting this battle. In fact, I think we're going to be out there, hopefully, burning tomorrow to try to beat this invasive honeysuckle back. But if you guide the change gradually, you can cultivate a thriving, resilient ecosystem. So come in with the plan, and you do the upfront work of removing the invasive species, and you get those eliminated first, and then you carefully select the trees to thin, and then you do that stepwise so that you're not just allowing too much energy to get down to the forest floor and let the invasive species explode on you. If you do that gradually, you can cultivate a thriving, resilient ecosystem. You can literally change the composition of the ecosystem over time, and organizations are really no different. Let's talk about how to do this. How do you guide your team through change? So we talked about the why, and this is the emotional resistance, which is the elephant, the cognitive resistance, which is the rider on top of it, and the cultural resistance, which is the path that they're traveling. So now let's shift gears and let's get a little practical here and talk about how you go about doing this.
Exactly. I mean, we set this up to be kind of daunting that to think about that change is difficult. So we want to make sure that we're giving you the tools that you can make that change because, once you actually understand the roots of that resistance, you can actually do something with it. So what we want to give you is a clear, straightforward playbook you can use the next time you're trying to implement a change. Whether it's going to be digital at the park or shifting from mowing everything to rewilding certain areas, here's a top 10 list for guiding your system through that change. And don't worry about taking notes. We'll put a link to a downloadable document with all of this right in the show notes.
Yes, we got your back, folks. You can listen to this while you're in the skid loader or while you're driving. Just next time you get slowed down, you can download the document. All right, number one, name the loss before they do. All right. So your team is going to feel it. The people that are involved in this change process, they're going to feel the loss. Like we said, that emotional resistance, that's a fear of loss. It isn't necessarily the logical side of things at first. It's that feeling of that loss of competence or whatever it is. So name it. And this really is guiding the elephant because that elephant is the emotion in all this. And so I'll say things to your team like, look, I know this means giving up a system that you've worked with for 20 years and that you have mastered. Like you've literally built this system that we're using now and we're making a shift in it. And I know that that feels like you're giving up some control, but we're going to work with you on it. We're going to make sure that you know this thing inside and out. Or maybe it's you worry that the public will see it as a weed patch or as poor maintenance. And we get that. So here's the narrative that we're going to make sure that we communicate so that that's not the perception. Or maybe it's you worry that the digital system won't work right or that certain people won't be able to use it. Calling these things out shows that you see your team and that you validate their concerns. That alone softens emotional resistance because let's face it, we're not exactly keen on talking about our feelings in any industry, but certainly in the one that we live in because we're a bunch of, rough and tumble kind of gritty outdoor people, right? So you've got to be able to call us out because I guarantee your park ranger isn't going to go up to you and be like, man, I'm really scared about rolling this thing out. Nobody's going to say that. So if you can call these things out and just address the emotion that you suspect they're going to feel. And even if you get it wrong and they say, no, I don't feel that at all. Okay, no loss, really. But if you do get it right, and you'll notice it when you call it out and you'll see it in them. People can't move forward until they know you understand what they feel like they're losing. And so call this out before they do.
Exactly. Say the quiet part out loud. It helps set everyone up for success and make sure that you understand what they're feeling. So, number two, connect the change to a shared purpose. If you've listened to this show before, you know that we're really big on start with why. And this is a huge one. This actually ties the change back to something everyone already cares about. Connect back to your why. When you connect it to your mission, connect it to that why. Whatever it is for your team, cultural resistance will start to melt. That new path looks more appealing to both that rider and to the elephant. If it's the digital registration system lets us spend more time with visitors instead of the office, or allowing card pay will make this park more accessible to new generations. They could actually be the future stewards of this land too. Like just because we're caring for this land, like a great quote that's out there is that it's not ours, it's just our turn. So it's just our turn to take care of it. And so we have to be able to, that we're bringing all people in and giving them opportunities to connect with this place. Another example may be that we're more than turf and playgrounds. Our parks are places for people to connect to the outdoors and to nature.
And that's a good distinction to make there is because oftentimes we don't equate the outdoors, and I'll put air quotes around that, with nature. We kind of see those things as separate, especially if you work in like city parks or municipal parks where it's more along the lines of outdoor recreation or sports based or more kind of park based. And oftentimes that separation between outdoors and nature is a real thing for a lot of folks. And so having that conversation and tying that back to, look, we are here to connect folks to the outdoors. I really like that. So tying that back to why absolutely is a big one. All right. Number three, paint a clear picture of the future state. So if we were to reference the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the other great books, one of the books that Jeremy had to read before we could be friends, um, so one of the 7 habits is begin with the end in mind. So remove the ambiguity. People resist what they can't visualize. So show them the destination. This really addresses all three types of resistance. So you can say things like, in a couple months, this patch is going to be full of milkweed and monarchs. We'll be able to lead plant ID and ecology programs within steps of the office here. Or we'll be able to see who's in our park with the swipe of a thumb rather than sorting through 100 envelopes. Things like that, painting that picture of once this thing is here, once it's fully implemented, what's this going to look like? And then how does that tie back to why it is that we're here and what we're trying to accomplish?
So number 4, break the change into small, low risk steps. So start small. Pilot it first. Maybe just one campground, one section of the park, one park entry line. Let the rangers keep their stack of envelopes for those older generation who always have cash in their pocket, and frame it as an experiment. These low risk steps are going to reduce the emotional threat and help the logical brain, the rider of the elephant, catch up.
Yeah. And that's a big one is I mean the foundation of ecology and in the scientific method is all an experiment. So, you don't necessarily have to be like, oh, we're gonna just completely overhaul everything right now. You can always start small. All right, number 5 is remove friction wherever you can. All right. So this basically comes down to just make the change easy. If you want people to use a new system or new process, give them simple tools to master it. So cheat sheets or signage or quick demos, bookmarked pages to the registration page on the online system, or an icon on the home screen of their mobile device. Walk them through to get those so that it's super easy for them to access the new system, give them the training that they need, whatever. Like getting back to that elephant rider analogy, whatever helps the rider stay on the path. And this could be pilot programs help with this too by building familiarity in those low risk environments like we just talked about. So think of Amazon's one-click purchase option. If you ever purchased anything from Amazon, you've seen that. Like once you've bought one thing and you've entered your information and they've got your billing address and all that kind of stuff, you can purchase more stuff with just one simple click. You put things in your cart and just bam, done. One click, boom. That's friction removal right there. I remember reading an article about how much time Amazon spent on mastering that because they would see that people would put things in their carts and then they would fall off. It was something like 30% of sales they were losing. And they're like, we got to fix this. And their engineers were like, well, if people just can't navigate the system, we got a really easy system. If they can't navigate that, then that's on them. No, that's, sounds an awful lot like resistance, doesn't it? And so they implemented this and sales went up and we all are just now used to it. So anytime you can reduce the number of steps or the cognitive load required to complete a task, whether it's buying that next thing online or looking up a camper registration, make it easier and it will therefore be more likely to happen.
Exactly. I think I need to remove Apple Pay off my phone. There's so many times that I'm like, man, what did I just buy? But then in the old system, I'd be like, do I really want to get up and get my credit card? You know what? It can just live in my shopping cart. We need to make it that easy for people to get into the park or register for their campsites.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point there. Apple Pay, you don't even need to remember to bring your credit card. You don't have to leave home with your wallet anymore. As long as you got your phone, most places now have Apple Pay. So you just hold your phone up to the little stupid little kiosk thing and double click that side button and boom, it pays. And I don't even know how it happens, but it does. It's freaking simple. There's been several times I've left the house and I'm like, shit, I forgot my wallet. And when I was standing at the counter, I'm like, oh wait, I got my phone. They take Apple Pay.
Exactly.
Click, click, done.
Yeah, exactly. We just need to make it that easy. Take that resistance away. So this gets us into number 6. Highlight early wins, especially emotional wins. This one relates back to one of our previous podcasts, and it's also something that I've been trying to implement all the time in my life too, is that we want to celebrate small wins loudly and repeatedly. So our episode that covered this was a few episodes ago. It's titled SPF2. And it's how to do recognition well. And it ties perfectly into this idea that if one camper says that the QR code was super easy, share that. When you see a car full of 20-year-olds using the digital pay line enter the park, share that. Then invite them to your next stewardship workday and just connect the dots and see if you can find that next steward. And connecting the last one too, I would love to put in one of our lanes at Hitchcock as digital and one of them as paper envelopes, and then test how many are we getting at each line, because I can almost guarantee that the digital line would have more people.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, even celebrate things like if pollinators start to show up in our rewilded areas, or better yet, we can even take like a bunch of fifth graders out there to look at the milkweed and just like it's the latest viral video, take a picture and celebrate that with people involved in the change. Emotional wins create momentum. Recognize and reward the behaviors you want to continue. When the ranger turns in half as many envelopes than the week before, celebrate that. Talk about how much admin time that saved. When the mowing crew starts bringing up new areas to plant to pollinator guards, celebrate that. Like, celebrate those small wins. And it's especially important to recognize and reward those even just little behaviors that you want to continue. It doesn't have to be like a full win of that job being completely done. Celebrate the small successes along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing it along the way and recognizing that small stuff that goes a long way. It's one thing to get to the end of the camping season and be like, oh, we made progress. 60% of our camping registrations were done digitally. Woohoo! Well, that was months getting to that. So if you had done that 7 times over throughout the camping season, maybe it was at the end of each month and celebrate that progress of maybe it goes from 10% to 15% and then a jump to 25 or whatever. Just celebrating those along the way, that will go a long way towards reducing that resistance. All right, number 7, protect identity while evolving roles. So, like we said earlier, people's identity is tied to this, and that fear of loss is really what is generating a lot of that resistance. That feeling of I'm losing who I am at work is real for a lot of people, especially with big system changes like new registration systems or changing from that manicured mowing mindset to bringing in a little bit more wild to your park or whatever the change is. These are just a couple examples that we're using here. Reassure them that their skills and their personality and their fit in your organization and in the work that they do still matters. You can say things like, your eye for detail is still important here. It just applies here in this particular situation now instead of over there like it did before. Or maybe something along the lines of, you're still the face of the park. You just now get to spend more time interfacing with campers and less time filling out those damn registration envelopes. And so having those conversations and addressing that head on is going to address both the emotional and the cultural resistance and really alleviate some of that fear that folks are going to have with the change effort.
Exactly. I think that a big one there is that idea of, a lot of park rangers are there for the people. And so connecting to something like, hey, think about how your time management is going to change. You're actually going to get more time to do the other parts of your job instead of just filling out envelopes and counting cash and trying to track down people that have or haven't paid. And this is one that's really hits home for me too, and a change that could be and probably is going to be happening in my job that we just applied for a bunch of grants. And if we get these grants, we're going to be working with a lot more contractors instead of just being out there and more hands on working on the land. And I always say that my favorite thing is running a chainsaw. And so like I can see this that I've already feel some personal resistance to that chain of like, well, this is going to be less time that I get to run a chainsaw. And so it's, this is going to be important for me too, to keep these things in mind, how things are just changing for me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me guess. You have had the thought in your head. There is nobody we can hire that can do this as well as we can. Or
There's a that it's definitely a possibility that like, man, if we get the wrong person, like we're just gonna have to end up babysitting them. And I just heard kind of a horror story from one of our partners that they hired contractors that said they were gonna have the job done in 3 months, and it's taken them a year and a half to get this project done.
dear God. Yeah, that sounds like contractors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I mean, that is a huge identity thing. When you're used to being the person going out there and doing the work, or even assembling the teams the way you guys have out there, and bringing those teams in and doing the stewardship with your own hands, to having that very impersonal, just hire a contractor, put out for bids and take the low bidder process. Like, man, that feels so corporate and impersonal. That would totally feel like a punch to the identity a little bit.
Yeah.
And so navigating that is going to be tough for sure.
Exactly. It's like the other day we were talking about it and we're looking at potentially bringing in millions of dollars to kind of like achieve a lot of our largest goals. And I was sitting there and I just said out loud like this is actually a little sad that like like we're going to achieve what we want to achieve. I'm just not going to be the one that like gets to cut down every tree anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Or
But with
oversee
that,
the interns that do. That's
exactly. Build
yeah,
build the teams and get everybody connected behind it. So getting on to number 8, create clarity loops. Communicate early, often, and repeatedly. So silence creates confusion. The confusion becomes cognitive resistance. Keep people in the loop. What's changing, what's not, what you learned, what's next. This one is huge. Just like take your people along and make sure that you're communicating with them so that they stop filling in those spaces of unknown. And so, like, this is really foundational to the adaptive management of that experiment framing that we've been talking about. That, like, don't just say, we're going to experiment with this new system and then not look at the results of the experiment. That's a sure way to erode trust. Instead, keep the communication flowing. Discuss what's working, what's not, and can be clear on the expectations and what are we actually going to do if we actually do find any shortfalls? Few of these changes can go perfectly right out of the gate. So go back and, talk about what you're going to do. And then at certain times, you're going to make sure that you're recognizing the wins along the way. And then once you get to a point, have an AAR, an after action review, and talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and what we're going to continue into the future through this change.
yeah. That's a good point. It's another a previous podcast we've talked about. I think we called it before you look forward, before you move forward, look back, and that's all about doing those after action reviews. But then that would also tie into that episode we did on the law of subtraction of here's some things we're doing, and if you determine that it's just not going right, then pull the plug on it. Like oftentimes we have this bias towards it's called the sunk cost fallacy. We've already committed so much time and resources or money and effort into this. Like we got to stay on the path. But if that path isn't leading you anywhere, you got to pull the plug on it. It's okay to say this isn't working. And that's a very hard thing for leaders to do. So yes, absolutely. That's a big one. All right,
And
number
it's
9. Yeah.
it's just like the example that you brought up about Chautauqua Park that, you had implemented a change and at the end of the day, the change wasn't the same. You were able to adapt along the way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The way it ended, it was different than the way it started. So, all right, number 9, invite participation instead of dictating the path. And this one ties right into that last one. It's getting people involved. When people help shape the change, they stop resisting, and when they're part of it, then there's going to be this buy-in. So this comes down to just asking questions like, what do you think visitors will think about this? Or what would make this easier for you out in the field to actually implement? Participation is going to create ownership, and that's going to soften the emotional and the cultural resistance. It's going to get the elephant more apt to go where you want it to go, and it's going to actually steer the path where you want that elephant to go in the first place. And so the more you invite participation, the more you'll have your team being part of the change process rather than feeling like they're victims of it. And that, again, it builds trust, which is foundational to a healthy culture. And over time, that trust will make future change easier to implement because if you roll out a particular change and you involve your team in it and they have the buy-in and you get through that change process all together, the next change process is going to be a little bit easier for them to buy into because they know that they're going to be part of it and not just have it shoved down their throats.
And that actually rolls us right into number 10 that we want to actually reinforce the cultural story. Like, this is who we are becoming. Like, narrate the new story for your team. People anchor themselves in identity. So define the identity that you're actually building. When we're the kind of crew that adapts, that leads, that does what's best for the land. Or you can say we are relentless at making it easy for everyone to visit our park. Or we are not afraid to experiment, to try new things in the service of our mission. These cultural shifts, when people start to see themselves in the future version of the organization, they will actually empower them to bring about a change and to adapt to that new culture. Like we set up in the beginning, that culture can run really deep. But if you do it in the right way, these changes can actually shift that culture, and these changes can really take root.
Yeah. And that's that the cultural story, like this whole idea of this is who we are becoming and weaving that into the culture of not necessarily this is who we are, period, but this is who we are becoming. And it paints a picture of where you're headed. In our next episode, we're going to be talking about that picture and the vision that you have and what that means for you and your team and your organization and all the impacts that you have moving forward. So be sure to check that here in a couple weeks. All right, let's close this out. Here's the big idea. Emotional resistance comes from fear, cognitive resistance comes from confusion, and cultural resistance comes from identity.
And your job as a leader isn't to push harder, it's to reduce fear, increase clarity, and reinforce that identity.
Do that consistently, and change stops feeling like a threat. It starts feeling like progress, and your team can move forward together. And that's a powerful thing to be a part of. And that's what we want to help you create at your organization. So if you want these 10 tips for leading change at your organization, you can download the summary using the link in the show notes.
And that's it for today. So speaking of change, we'd like to remind you about the upcoming meetup with someone who is no stranger to big changes in organizations on November 21st at noon. We'll be chatting live over Zoom with best-selling author Jessica D'Angelo. Her book, The Wild Advantage, describes the big changes she's making to the typical corporate retreat and strategy sessions. This live meetup is by invite only for our subscribers to our next level leadership community. So if you're not already a member, join for free simply by providing your name and email at parksandrestoration.com. Then watch your inbox for the invite and the sign up link.
And if you're already a member of the email, if you already get the emails from us, you're getting the invite, so be sure to just click the button and register. I'm stoked about this. Jess is not a professional parks person. She comes from the corporate world, working with some of the largest companies on the planet, and she discovered the business value of hitting the trail. She lives out in Boise, Idaho, so they got a lot of trails out there. And she's now sharing that with the world through her business called Hike to Become and this new book. I really hope you can join us on November 21st. All right. Better leaders, better parks. This is the Parks and Restoration podcast, where every other week we share strategies to help you, the parks and natural resource professional, develop into the leader you aspire to be. One that brings big changes to parks, to landscapes, and to communities and future generations. Thanks for all you do out there, and we'll talk again soon. Take care.